Hi, this is Vivian from PharmaSalon. Before you watch, I want to let you know that if you're interested in getting a CE credit for this video, go to the show notes below. There's a link to the Compounding CE website that will take you directly to the quiz for this class. The show notes also include the questions on the quiz, so be sure to check them out. While you're there, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel.
Hi, my name is Syed Saleem. I'm excited to be the part of another informative and educative session organized by PharmaSalon. The previous PharmaSalon session have been very successful and informative. The knowledge and pure interaction were of great benefit to the participants and presenters. The Q&A and the fireside chat have been very interesting and informative. I'm a pharmacist with an MBA, having licensed in 24 states in the US and about 50 plus certifications from FDA, PDA, DEA, PMP, and others. I'm in the pharmaceutical manufacturing industry and operations, regulatory compliance fields. During these past 20 years, I've been as an entrepreneur, director of operations, principal consultant, business development, regulatory affairs, and more. I'll be talking about supplier qualification and equipment validation. It will give you an insight into the regulatory requirements of the supplier qualification and its importance. Also, I'll be talking about the equipment qualification. Why is it important in the CGMP and 503B industry?
I have no conflict of interest. Learning objectives. Define qualification of suppliers and equipment in 503B pharma outsourcing. Name who approves the qualification of suppliers and equipment. Outline why validation is necessary during qualification of equipments.
With this, I'd like to start the introduction to supplier qualification and equipment validation. Supplier qualification. Why is supplier qualification is needed? It is needed because you need to deliver high quality ingredients and APIs. Nowadays, a lot of suppliers are able to supply, or due to supply chain disruptions, many of the spurious material is ending up into the pharmaceutical APIs and components. That is why it is very important to qualify the supplier, to verify the supplier. Delivery of safe materials, making sure that the material or the APIs, the chemicals, the components, everything what you're getting from the supplier is of safe and quality. Prevent potential adverse events. Of course, when you have a spurious material into the supply chain and as an ingredient, it will cause or is prone to cause any serious effects. Avoid obtaining spurious material or ingredient, substandard and spurious materials. Maintain quality of the product. Of course, as a manufacturer, you definitely want to maintain the quality of the product because the reputation and the confidence of the customer relies on providing a quality product consistently. It is also a regulatory requirement as per the 21 CFR Part 211 and Subpart E. It is a responsibility of the manufacturer of an API and a medical product to qualify the vendor. Vendor should also qualify the supplier from whom he procures the raw materials. Those suppliers who supply the material to you should also qualify their suppliers. All the documents from the vendor and manufacturing are verified during the audit. Typically, the materials are classified into 4 categories depending on its criticality in API manufacturing and risk to the patients. ICHQ9 can be used for assessing the criticality of the risk to the patients. They can be non-critical raw materials, critical raw materials, registered intermediaries, APIs. And again, the level of risk goes downwards, which is basically API being the more critical. Typically, there are several steps to follow for supply qualification. One is supplier selection, making sure that the supplier which is supplying the raw materials or APIs to you is a reputed source, has a history in the business for quite some time, and making sure that this supplier if it is domestic or international, making sure the supplier has a registration with FDA and the regulatory bodies and they do not have any of those warning letters or any of the correction or the corrective actions taken against them. Due diligence, of course, it's a responsibility of the manufacturer to making sure that the supplier has a clean record, or if any of the regulatory documents or regulatory citations issued, they have corrected those particular issues and are in compliance with the FDA and other regulatory bodies. Quality assessment of all suppliers. Again, it is our quality department would work with the quality department of the suppliers, making sure that the product what they're obtaining is of desired quality. Change control and production assessment. This is again, if there's any change in the supplier's supply chain, if they change their suppliers, if for any reason the product what they are supplying has any changes, there's a proper documentation into change control, and there's proper communication to us. And once you get your any of the communication, you definitely do another qualification or abbreviated way to making sure that that particular product meets the necessary requirements. And supply chain security. Of course, this is another a very critical aspect of the supply chain. A lot of times, suppliers obtaining from a different supplier, if the chain is broken, if some bad player comes in between, that creates a problem. So making sure that the original product where it is produced all the way to the end product manufacturer is the integrity is maintained. It's basically saying that cradle to grave, all the supply chain security is maintained. Then there's an ongoing and monitoring evaluation. This is another important aspect, just not supplying qualifying suppliers, but also you need to make sure that those suppliers are constantly adhering to the needs. So we talked about the supplier selection. What are the things you need to look for supplier selection? There's a user requirement specification should be provided to the purchase on the basis of which the vendor will be selected. So when you want to purchase a certain product, you need to have something called user requirement specifications. You need to clearly know what exactly you want to obtain from this particular supplier as to what quality and purity, integrity. The URS, which is user requirement specification, will contain name of the product, including the chemical name, CAS number, specification, and quantity required. You need the information like manufacturing, packaging, labeling details, MSDS, that is material safety data sheets. Nowadays, this is called as SDS, safety data sheets, basically, that will have complete detail about the particular product handling. Analytical test methods to determine the sample against the specific criteria or to be requested from the suppliers. This is an important aspect of that. Typically, you do an HPLC or some sort of a spectrometry to making sure that that particular product meets the specific purity, integrity, and purity. Lead time to produce. This is another important aspect, because if you are producing certain product, you need to be planning ahead to have that particular product in stock to manufacture that final product. So that's why it's very important to have the lead time into consideration with the supplier. Delivery time. Again, if the supplier is overseas, this particular matters because of the disruptions in the supply, transportation, things like that. Quality system certificates. Again, this is a certificate which is issued by the supplier, making sure that that particular product, API, component, or chemical meets the particular standard. Residual solvent certificate. This is another certificate which is issued along with that quality certificate with CO of A, that is a certificate of analysis. It does mention the residual solvents. There is a limit for each. There is an acceptable limit. That's all those residual solvents should be within the limits. The material supplied by the vendor should comply with these specifications. Categorization of the raw materials. This can be categorized into group 1, group 2, etc., group 3. Group 1 typically has acids, bases, solvents, filter aids, petroleum-based raw materials, naturally occurring raw materials, packaging materials, water systems, utilities like nitrogen and compressed air. Group 2 catalyst, enzymes, chemicals, building, etc. And group 3 API starting materials. Criteria for critical raw materials, API registered intermediates have been identified. Assurance of the supply, quality and regulatory compliance, cost and procurement aspects, technical and innovation aspects, communication capabilities, and responsiveness. Due diligence. Exercise a due diligence with the supplier's material and any change to be brought to their notice and ask for justification. Excuse me about that. Let's see. Criteria for a critical raw material API registered intermediates have been identified. That is assurance of supply, quality and regulatory compliance, cost and procurement aspects, technical and innovation aspects, communication and capabilities, and responsiveness. All these factors to be considered while evaluating suppliers. Due diligence. Exercise the due diligence with suppliers and materials and any change to be brought to their notice and ask for justification. This is, again, usually quality assurance of the company would look into this along with the management, making sure that exercising the due diligence, any of these changes are, when they're identified, they will reach out to the supplier to making sure, asking for the reasons for among those why it is like. And again, based on the report received, if the issues are critical to quality or to GMP issues, then it needs to be escalated to the senior management for resolution. Quality assessment. So it is a duty or is a responsibility of a manufacturer to have a quality assessment done on the suppliers. This can be done various methods. One is you would send a questionnaire, a supplier qualification questionnaire, and you also do a supplier on-site audits. That is recommended by the regulatory authorities to have an on-site audit. What kind of quality program is in place? Is a quality department is independent. That is one very important aspect. Most of the times, the quality department is part of the other departments, but according to regulations, the quality department must be independent of other departments in releasing the product or rejecting the product. The role of the quality department, how involved they are, what kind of authority they have in the department as in the supplier department, supplier or the manufacturer. What kind of authority they possess in accepting, rejecting the products. How is their quality control and quality assurance department, the personnel, the quality director, quality manager, their qualification of vendors and suppliers. Again, as a supplier, they need to qualify their particular vendors. So you need making sure that we need to make sure they have a robust system in place for their qualification of vendors and suppliers. QMS and quality manual. This is very important. Every manufacturer or supplier needs to have a QMS, that is quality management system, and quality manual. Quality manual is basically a mother of all the quality documents, which lists the subsections of the quality processes they have, how they evaluate the quality systems in their particular organization. Do they have in-process inspection and internal audit procedures? Do they have the quality agreements with vendors? Notification of procedures for any changes from their vendors and to the vendors? And what kind of document control systems they possess? Change control. how they handle the change control, who authorizes this, and how it is being checked, and how it is approved. Cross-contamination measures. This is another very, very important thing, cross-contamination measures. I personally, when I went to visit the on-site audits, I make sure that they have department and their systems, the building design such that there is a very least or no cross-contamination in their procedures. You also need to check and ask questions as to how they produce the products, what kind of products they produce, how there is a batch changes, what kind of products are either needs to be repackaged, how they repackage, what are the control measures they apply in cleaning the processes, and how they validate the cleaning processes. All those things need to ask questions and do the due diligence. Change control and production assessments. Initiation of change. So whenever there is a change in process, it needs to go through a process of change. That is documentation again. Initiation of the change, why the change needs to happen, mechanism for review of change. And there should be a proper documented flow of the change in which there is a proper procedure which everybody needs to follow for that particular change. And execution of the change, how the change is executed, evaluation of the change, how they are evaluating the change, closure of the temporary change control package, and then preparation of ongoing monitoring. These are the things which you need to look for the robust assessment of the suppliers, because they are following all these measures in their quality processes. Supply chain security. As I discussed earlier, supply chain security is one of the major important thing in today's supply chain industry. You probably heard there are so many, there were some recalls, or there are so many incidences or instances in which some spurulous chemical came into the manufacturing processes, and that led to a lot of recalls. The entire supply chain from the manufacturer to the customer should be assessed and qualified from a quality perspective. Like, for example, for temperature and humidity sensitive materials, the use of data loggers should be considered in order to have documented evidence that the product was stored at required conditions during transportation. Again, especially for the cold chain products, that is very critical to have that particular temperature storage requirement is maintained throughout the supply chain. Changes on the original container should be avoided. Example, while repackaging, relabeling, it can cause risks of alteration or contamination. Package requirements, making sure that the tamper-resistant packaging closure should be used by the manufacturer. A manufacturer-specific design of the seal is recommended to be used. The use of unique seal is to be considered for this type of seal required by the manufacturer if the manufacturer is to be conveyed. Label evaluation. The customer should have evaluated the label. The label on the material should match with the reference label provided by the manufacturer. The labels need to be in line with the ICH Q9 for APIs and registered intermediates. Hence, also need to indicate, the label should indicate the name, address of the manufacturer, and special storage and transport conditions. Identification code of the product, batch number, quality of the contents, and the expiry date. In case of retest test, this may be indicated on the CFA. Assessment of the CFA against the authentic manufacturer CFA. With all this having done, we also need to make sure there's an ongoing monitoring and evaluation. Constantly look out for any of the FDA newsletters, warning letters, and other sources for vendor behavior and communicate accordingly. This is a typical vendor management across the life cycle of the product, where you can see there is a flow of identifying the potential suppliers, supplier selection process, data collection from the suppliers, shortlisting them, sample evaluation, and then how to recommend what the quality assessments are, quality agreement developments, approvals, all this. Typically, suppliers are evaluated at the beginning and the very initially when they are when they are doing the vendor analysis and vendor assignments or supplier contracts. Few of the documents which are very important to go with is a supplier agreement. Then there's a quality document, quality agreements, which lists the quality aspects of the supplier as to in any instances if they found any deviation in the processes or product or their own supply, they need to communicate to the manufacturer. So that concludes the supplier qualification. And if we have any questions at this time, we can discuss those.
Excellent. Thank you, Syed. That is very robust. There's a lot of great information there. One of my questions is, how often does the supplier qualifications need to be done?
Perfect. That's a great question. And it is, so initially, before even you purchase a product from a supplier, we have to qualify the supplier. So that is one time you have to make sure that there's a robust due diligence done, which is basically sending them a supplier questionnaire, and then doing an on-site audit if possible, though it's not required if you're doing as IDing the sample at your end. So in general, so initially for all the APIs, there's a yearly assessment is required, and anything other than APIs such as components and everything else every 2 years. So that is a requirement. And sometimes it depends if the manufacturer feels that there is even more, it's needed more often, and then definitely they can do more often. If there is any change in their processes or anything that is recommended, that they would go, and if there's a merger, if there's a acquisition, things of that nature, those also require if they can do a further in between qualification as well.
Okay, thanks. Do we need to do an on-site audit? And if we do, then what are the advantages?
That's another very good question, which is basically the regulatory authorities look for an on-site audit, which doing an on-site audit is good because you will be able to visit the facility. You can get to see the hands-on how the products are made. And sometimes, I mean, there's a lot of news and also some of the experiences where people have those fancy websites with everything, but when they visit the on-site facility, it is in a very bad condition and it doesn't meet some of those requirements. So seeing physically that particular the supplier's facility gives an idea as to their other programs. So it's basically, it is not required for if you are doing a testing at the manufacturer end, but it is highly recommended.
Okay, great. What is the future of supplier qualification?
That is actually a very, very good and important question, especially during this pandemic and then post, and also the technology getting integrated. One option for the supplier qualification is looking into the blockchain model. Blockchain is a process of decentralized ledger verification, wherein which the suppliers are evaluated or the ledger is maintained, documented at every step of the process of movement of the goods and components. If that technology can be adopted in the future, the supply chain becomes so much transparent and verifiable. Hopefully that technology is going to be adopted in the future. And with that, there will be, on each step, there is an RFID comes with the product. They'll be able to log that in the ledger, which is verifiable by multiple ledgers. And that way, that will contain or to eliminate the spurious material getting into the supply chain.
Okay, great. And of course, we talked a little bit about blockchain in one of our podcasts. So that is an exciting topic to continue to watch. Anyway, that wraps up my questions on this section.
So continuing with this, we will go into our next section, which is equipment qualification and validation. So this equipments used at the facility must be qualified and validated prior to the use. So the qualification plan for an equipment to be qualified, there should be a plan as to what is the purpose, what is the scope, what is the equipment description, operational specifications, acceptance criteria, testing results, discrepancies or corrective actions, conclusions, and the final report. So anytime we purchase an equipment, there needs to be a clearly defined purpose of it. For example, autoclaves, dry heat ovens, any of those pH meters, any of the manufacturing equipment which when you purchase, there is a clearly defined purpose of it, and you define the scope of use, and this can be qualified by calibration and validation. Calibration is a process of making sure that particular equipment meets the said parameters by the manufacturer of that particular equipment. And then validation is a process where we are verifying that that particular equipment is able to perform the desired function at the facility. So these things need to be defined prior to qualifying an equipment at a manufacturing facility. There is a equipment validation document, which can be done in-house by the quality assurance, or they can have a third party do the validation. So that is anytime prior to making any batches and releasing, the equipment must be qualified. The qualification of the equipment qualification, when done by the third party, they also use certain equipments, the instruments, which also must be certified. They need to have a NIST certification or any other certification, such as thermophiles or temperature probes or thermostats, any of those, what is used in the qualification processes. So qualification and validation. The definition of qualification is an action of proving that any premises, systems, and items of equipment work correctly and actually lead to the expected results. Validation usually incorporates the concept of qualification. So qualification is a part of validation. Qualification is the first step in validation. Validation usually incorporates the concept of qualification. A process of establishing confidence that the equipment is capable of consistently operating within established limits and tolerances. Studies therefore done prior to use. Qualification is basically confirming the compliance with the specified requirements or criteria. Do you have the right tool for the job? Perform on one element or component of the process to be validated. Conduct tests to establish if the component of the process has the attributes to produce the specified outcome. Validation is basically the proof. That means the document that process will consistently produce a predetermined outcome. Validation is an action of proving in accordance with the principles of GMP that any procedure, process, or equipment, material, activity, or system actually leads to expected results. It is a process using documented evidence that provides a high degree of assurance that a specific process will consistently produce the predetermined outcome. So the stages of qualification of equipment. So prior to use, if you wanted to commission an equipment, commissioning is nothing but process of making sure buying equipment, first of buying the equipment, making sure it's qualifying the equipment for the intended use, validating the equipment for the intended use, and then commissioning it. So then you put into practice. So stages of qualification is design qualification. This basically describes, first, again, what is the purpose you're trying to get this machine for. For example, autoclave. When you're buying an autoclave, making sure that you're buying from a reputed source. The autoclave is from a reputed company. The company has some established history of making the quality products for over a period of time. And what is the intention of using the particular autoclave or dry heat oven, such as deparagenation or sterilization, things of that nature. And what capacity do you need? What is your maximum batch size? How often do you be using this? So all these parameters to be considered prior to selection of the equipment. That is basically design qualification. So once you have that, you present this to the supplier and you get quotes from different suppliers, qualified suppliers, and then you pick one based on the quality assurance department and the management decision. And once you purchase the particular equipment, you need to have it calibrated. So you calibrate the equipment based on the specification you received and also your requirements. So, for example, if you have a particular equipment coming in, such as dry heat oven, you purchase that particular capacity, and then you look for the batch size, the number of vials, or you'll be deparagenating the batch size, etc. So then you qualify it, that making sure that that particular oven has all those the dimensions, and each of those places that the heat is evenly distributed. This is done by a validation, which is IQ, installation qualification and operation qualification. This is again done making sure that the power supply which is going to the particular oven is of the required specification listed on the manufacturer, and making sure that there's no power fluctuations coming in, making sure that the equipment is evenly heated, all the walls, center, everywhere. And then you do it without the product inside, without your vials inside. And once you know that this particular machine, let's say in this example, oven has evenly heat distributed and everything, and now you put your product in. And that is the operational qualification. So basically you're trying to make sure that this particular equipment is able to handle your intended use. So that is operational qualification. And then there's a performance qualification, which you'll be using the most your highest batch size. So you'd be validating the equipment with your maximum batch. That is basically the worst case scenario. So making sure that even if you push it to the limits, the equipment is able to handle and sustain and produce the desired results. So these are the steps you need to be considering in the validation of the equipment. So that concludes my talk on supplier qualification and equipment qualification. If you have any questions in regards to the equipment qualification, I would be happy to take.
Okay, great. Can you produce the batches initially without equipment qualification?
Oh, no, absolutely no. As a manufacturer, you cannot, you should not produce any of the products or batches. You cannot release or produce any of the batches without qualifying the equipment. Otherwise, they are not made per CGMP.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. How often do you need to qualify the equipment?
Great question. So the regulations say at least once a year, but again, it depends on the facility and the robustness and how the amount of use. Let's say, for example, if somebody's using an autoclave, I would not wait for 1 year or 6 months. I would suggest to do some sort of an even if it's an abbreviated validation every so often. I would say even I think that the recommended is up to quarterly, if again the number of batches they're producing, because if your autoclave, for example, if you're making batches daily, producing, sterilizing, for the matter, even the dry heat oven, if you qualify it yearly once, and at the end of the year, if you discover there is some discrepancy, then it becomes questionable for all the batches prior. So for that reason, again, this is a risk assessment. This risk assessment is a very, very common in the CGMP industry, since there is everything is based on the risk associated with it. And typically, the quality assurance should be very well versed with the risk assessment process, and they should be able to gauge how often equipment needs to be calibrated. Most of the times, some of the equipments, such as pH meters, thermometers, and things of that nature, the refrigerators, those are calibrated or validated at least once a year. But again, quality assurance would be able to make that judgment call as to if any earlier than that is needed. But yes, that is, it depends on the facility's use.
Okay, thanks. My final question is, who is responsible for the equipment qualification?
Again, I think that's the equipment qualification by default falls on the quality assurance and the management. So the equipment qualifications, as I mentioned earlier, the quality assurance is the one who will be able to make the call on how often they will need those particular equipments to be calibrated and validated, and they can work with the management and make that decision.
I'm Amy Summers, and I'm a consultant to 503As and 503Bs. I am a pharmacist. I've spent my entire career in compounding, so it's my passion, it's my thing. Where do you see the 503B industry headed from a quality perspective? Does it mirror commercial drug manufacturing? Is it more like a hybrid of manufacturer meets compounder? And also, do you think it's difficult to make all the entities happy?
So 503B is basically created to fill the gap, basically to fulfill the gap of shortage drugs, which not the big pharma is picking up. So, and to facilitate the necessary drugs to be made available at the same time, meeting the GMP quality. So the bar has been increased to make the compounded drug to go up to the level and quality of the manufacturing. But at the same time, there is a limited stability testing provision given. So one, quality is maintained. Second, to fulfill the gap or need existing between the manufacturing versus a big compounder.
What do you think about 503Bs, and is there something that comes to mind that they struggle most with in their quality management system? I know, Syed, you talked about equipment validation. Is that a weak point for us 503Bs? Is it something else? Because
the 503Bs are mostly coming from the compounding background, with the compounding history. Now, to catch up with the manufacturing regulations, the FDA, CFR, that is a little bit of a learning curve. Most of the times, compounding refers to 797 USPs. Yeah. But when you get into the CGMP, you get with the CFRs, 21 CFR, Part 211, 210, another Part 11, and all that. So that's the learning curve, and I personally have a little bit of a challenge in making the compounding personnel understand the CGMP regulations. So in a compounding world previously, you buy an equipment and you, based on the manufacturer specification, you just take the face value and you start producing it. You never had a chance to validate it or validate the equipment. Whereas when you come to manufacturing, you have to validate everything prior to producing any batches commercially. So yes, equipment validation is, again, talking about the quality management systems. Building the quality management system itself is something new to the compounding industry. So setting up a quality department, quality control, quality assurance, and how the microbiology aspects are taken care in terms of environmental monitoring, personal monitoring, cleaning validations, equipment validation, process validation, aseptic validations, APS, aseptic process simulations. So all these terms are fairly new to the historically compounding industry. This is a little bit of a learning curve. And again, I think the expectations of the FDA is to have the 503Bs, since they distribute the product, not dispense. So you fall into a different circle. And the expectations are, and the bar is up in the high there. So yes, the quality management system is a little challenging area, but again, I think we are evolving. 503B is fairly a 6-7 year old concept, 7-8 year olds, I think, 2013, so it makes about 7-8. So yes, that is a little bit of a challenging topic.
Would you say that 503Bs would be better off in getting some folks on board that have a GMP background?
Absolutely, yes. I agree. Absolutely, I agree. Having a GMP background definitely helps with team understanding the requirements, the need, and most of the times when you explain why and how the impact is, that makes it much of an easy to understand and follow.
Yeah, I'd say that's true. I actually had a question already outlined, and it has to do with disqualifying a critical supplier. So my question to you is, what do you do if you need to disqualify a critical supplier? Perhaps maybe you've learned that they have a concerning 483 or a warning letter, or maybe there was a product failure that you found the root cause to be that supplier. So I guess, what do you do?
Sure. Obviously, you have to have a due diligence and a constant watch on the supplier's behavior in terms of watching the FDA warning letters, and also getting the supplier's any issues he has in the news and such. So if you find a supplier, and if you, again, if it's a critical supplier, you don't have any other supplier who is able to supply the particular raw material. In this case, again, quality is number one. We go with the concept of the basic three principles: safety, efficacy, and quality. So if I'm doubtful of making any of these three, so in that case, that's the risk assessment you have to make. Is this product, or is it API which we received from this particular supplier, is safe, effective, and of the required quality? If this is not meeting these three parameters, that's the decision the quality would make in terms of.
What's the far-reaching effect that it has? Do you need to do a stability study again, or some other kind of validation if you had to disqualify your critical supplier and it was like your API, for example?
Absolutely. I think they have to go back to the books, do a risk evaluation impact. Risk evaluation impact is the critical thing which quality should take. Whatever the API or the component which is affected from that particular supplier is in question, they definitely need to go back and revise those batch records for any of the potency failures, any of the risk associated with the product, and then categorize into critical, major, and minor. Based on that, they would make a call, either including up to, in cases up to a recall, which nobody likes it. But if it is that critical, then up to that, you may have to take that step. And also keep this particular supplier on the watch list. I don't know if for any other products or component affected from this particular supplier, Not only that product which is affected, but also other supplied material becomes in question now. So again, it's a risk assessment and impact. These two terms quality should be looking into every single time.
Yeah, I agree. Do you have any, you mentioned a minute ago about when you're using a supplier that has no competitor, like this is the only place you can get this item. So as a 503B that's kind of stuck with just one option, how do you qualify someone where, there's only one choice? And what would you do if it really didn't, meet all of your wish lists? Like maybe their supply chain's sluggish right now or something. Can you just speak on this, Syed, a little bit?
Absolutely. Again, I would say the quality would need to look into the three basic principles: safety, efficacy, and quality. Our goal is to provide safe, effective product. If at all the product or the API, the component is available, then we'll be able to produce one. If there isn't a product which is available, which meets the quality standards, then it doesn't make sense to make the product and take a risk. So providing the safe and effective product should be a priority. It's not the supplier. If the supplier is, if we cannot qualify the supplier, or we're not confident enough about the product, about the chemical, about the API, then I think there isn't any going further, because if the quality is in question, then going forward it doesn't make sense.
That's actually what I wanted to hear. I wanted to understand if I got it, because in my head I thought, well, if all my needs aren't being met from a quality perspective, then how can I move on? So I'm glad to hear you say that. Following up,
sure.
What should a 503B do if their supplier of an API changes the source of their ingredient? So let's say your 503B purchases an active from some supplier, and then their supplier, from manufacturer A has now been changed to manufacturer B. And pursuant to your quality agreement, they let you know what happened. But what would you need to do from a 503B perspective? Do you need to do anything on that?
Absolutely. There's something called pedigree. Pedigree means you need to go back to the source of the manufacturing. So the person who originally made the product. Now, as part of the quality due diligence would be to vet that particular manufacturer and the supply chain and everybody in between. There is information available to look up online, FDA registered manufacturers, the history of the original manufacturer. Partly the supplier who's supplying you the product has an obligation to qualify his own supplier. And when we are qualifying our supplier, we need to make sure and ask questions as to how he is qualifying his supplier. So if their qualification requirements are stringent, that basically makes sure that they have a good and effective supplier qualification in place. One is to check that from your supplier, and also to vet the supplier who is now the new supplier, B. How long is he in the market? I mean, is there any kind of a FDA warning letters or any kind of red flags you can find for him? So basically, the quality need to do a full due diligence when they get these letters of change from the supplier.
Mm-hmm. Thomas, do you have anything to add in regards to maybe stability studies in this kind of example, where the manufacturer of your supply of, maybe the API has now been changed?
Well, I know that is a concern from the agency. I think that individuals look at that process. Chemically, you want to ensure that the purity, the strength, the adulterant, there's no chromatographic impurity issues or residual solvents. I think one question you came up earlier, this is particularly of interest when you change the supplier of the API. Mm-hmm. That manufacturer of that API, you want to make sure it's consistent with quality, so it's not changing your product that you're giving to that patient. So whatever you need to do to ensure that and document that and show that at your level of regulatory authority, area, then you need to do so.
Yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned critical versus non-critical raw materials. What's the difference?
So the critical raw material is anything, example being APIs, anything that has a direct impact and is able to change the pharmacology.
Okay.
So, and again, anything which can which is going to affect the quality and safety of the product.
Okay.
That's basically the critical. And non-critical is anything which is directly not affecting these two parameters primarily.
So where does, like, if you're aseptic processing and not terminal sterilization, would the filter be considered critical?
Absolutely, which is having a direct impact on the product quality. Anything, any API, chemical, packaging, any of these which is having a direct impact on the quality of the product is considered critical. So aseptic processing, filter, your personnel monitoring, environmental monitoring, API used, component used, packaging used. I mean, we're talking about leachables, making sure that the product doesn't have any leaching properties into the chemical. Anything directly touching the product would be critical.
And you recommended requalifying those suppliers that are like for your APIs to do it annually, just based off the guidance, and the other components every 2 years, and maybe in between if there's some changes. I guess I just wanted to infer that would that include other non-drug components like the filter or something like that?
Yes. APIs are definitely, as per the guidance, you have to qualify annually, at least minimum, and again, as risk-based. So for that reason, the quality needs to be keeping a constant eye on the supplier, the chemical, the supplier, making sure that they are getting the quality product in. And talking about the filters, of course, definitely. The filter is being one of the critical and most important component which is affecting directly the product quality. This definitely is, I would consider it part of an API. It would be like an API, as critical as an API. So whoever the supplier is, making sure that the filters are, what the filters we're getting is of quality, and whatever the claim they make. For example, PTFE filters and the other hydrophilic or hydrophobic filters used for particular terminal sterilization, they need to be evaluated for the purpose what they're used. And also the supplier definitely need to be evaluated, and the manufacturer also needs to be looked for their specifications and again, the whole qualification process.
Well, thank you for listening. I certainly had a good time, asking all these questions and learning from you. So thank you very much.
Thank you for watching. Remember, if you would like ACPE credit for this lecture, click on the link below and register for the class. You won't have to watch the video again, just answer the quiz questions. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you can be updated on all our latest content.